Here on the Creative Thinker podcast, we discuss all theories, philosophy, and thought behind the creative process. And we hope that you find some inspiration along the way.
Hello and welcome to the Creative Thinker podcast. Shout out to creative thinkers all across this wonderful little globe. My name is Henry Moon, and I'll be your host, and I'm joined by
Michael Vasquez. We're at home today. Our schedule is a little crazy, but we still wanted to get a podcast out. Apologize for the video probably looking weird. Hopefully the audio is a little bit more clear than it has been the last couple of weeks. We recorded a set and my microphone was backwards. So we didn't notice that until after we had finished recording and some of the episodes started coming out. But hey, it's part of the process. Anyways, today we're talking about NPCs. Why do we use them? Who are they? What are they? We're going to figure that out today on Creative Thinker Podcast. Henry, what are NPCs?
So NPCs are any character in your story that your main character, your protagonist interact with. So an NPC can be the villain, it can be the best friend, it can be anybody in the story that is not your main character. And that's what makes NPCs exciting. You're coming up with this framework around them because it all comes down to, at least where I like to start, is their function in the story. It all becomes another narrative element instead of how I used to think about NPCs was, okay, I need to create this entire would-be main character, and then I'm going to set them in my story, and then especially with D&D, it's like your characters come in contact with it, don't find it interesting, and move on. And it's like, I've got all this back work, this pre-work I've done into this character, and it just falls flat. And so instead of that approach, using it as a narrative element is going to encourage your audience to engage with it because there's a purpose for them to be there. And that purpose is what's pulling the audience into the character. And then the elements that you add into them to make them more main character-like is what's going to make them memorable to the audience, but it's not why they're there.
Right.
And so since I've changed that element, it seems like my characters have been a lot more impactful. And so that's what we're sharing today. And so like the thing that I want to jump into right at the beginning is, what is the function? So like, I think John Wick is my favorite example for this. So the bad guy from the first movie. And another caveat I need to make about our episode we were talking about Harry Potter is Ron Weasley's dad definitely has magic. And Mr. Filch is like, he is the only character that's like wizard born that doesn't have magic.
And he was the custodian at Hogwarts, right? Something like that.
Yeah, because he just was like wizard born but didn't have magic. So for whatever reason, and Hagrid also had magic. He was just expelled from Hogwarts. He was expelled, so he couldn't use it. He was like not allowed to. Like, even in the first movie, he gives like Harry's cousin or whatever. I'm messing up more of the story, but anyway, he gives the other kid. He gives him a tail, like he just does a little bit of magic, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not supposed to do magic, but whatever."
Man, we haven't watched that. Well, I haven't watched it in a while. I forgot about that.
So long. So anyway, apologies to the Harry Potter fans. I got an earful about that one. So anyway, oops. So anyway, back to John Wick, the villain in the first movie, like this rich playboy character who is a criminal. Like, if you change the word like killed a dog, you could change it to accidentally killed the dog, and he could be a main character. His whole arc, his everything about him, he could have been a main character. It could have been like just one of those like crime movies.
Yeah.
He could have been a badass, right? And his function was as the villain in that story. And that's the only thing that changes. And so like, that's what I'm just trying to divorce the idea between function in a story and character, because you can have a really excellent character that is serving a function that makes them eliminatable. I'm trying to think, like, you can throw them out. And so we're talking about function. And so when you come to an NPC, I think the first question is, where do they fit in the story, and what purpose do they serve long term?
And I think like what you're saying too is, even to help someone like figure out what the function is of their NPC, I think there are tiers to it, right? So you're talking about a tier. If you're talking about like superheroes or whatever, you have your tier S, or anime characters or whatever. Your tier S, that's like the super badass NPC. That's the one that's gonna have all the abilities. That's gonna be the one that's hopefully the antagonist of the story. What tier list are you going to create these NPCs in that will help the function? Your tier S is going to be constantly pushing against your main characters, right? Or at least should be, to be like a well-developed, bad guy or BBEG or whatever. And then you start looking down the NPCs, and then from there you start creating the functions for them, right? Because at some point your tier like what D NPC is going to be letting your characters into a tavern or something, or giving them a quest, something like that.
Like we've all seen.
How I'm thinking about it, as far as like, what's their function? Okay, what tier list am I going to put them in? How much time am I going to spend on them? Because I feel like you're going to spend way more time on your tier S NPC versus your tier, CDE NPC, where some of the NPCs, like, as a player in my games, some of my NPCs just come up totally through improv, and I got to look up a name for them, and then it becomes like this person that was was like a tier E, but then kind of got bumped up because of how I made them, I guess, or through the role play, how people thought they were interesting. So I think NPCs can move through that, but how much time you're going to put into them puts them in that tier list.
Yeah, I think we've all seen movies with the annoyed secretary character. It's like you only see them once and they have to leave an impression, and it's like, just so blasé that somebody comes in and they're not even giving them the time of day, right? We've all seen that character. That's a trope. And like when you're creating a tier E character, it's like you need, once you know that they have no long-term story impact, then you're trying to make them really impactful really quick. And so that changes how you go about their character. It's like, the receptionist example is like, okay, well, they're always going to be in a bad mood, or they're going to be nice to the person right before them in line. And then, they're not in the crowd, so they get treated badly, whatever. It's like, it's a very quick impression that you have to make with that character. I don't think in most stories, I think you should plan to have at least 2 interactions with a character. Like action movies withstanding, they go through characters pretty quick, where it's just you bump into them, there's a fight or something, and they move on. You only see a character once. But like in terms of production, in terms of like writing economy and things like that, which is just like the amount of time you spend on certain things, like you're saying, if you get down to like tier Z in your novel, you're walking past somebody and you spend all this time describing them, that doesn't make any sense. But to me, like my rule for myself is like, if I'm not going to see this character at least twice, and there's not going to be some payoff to their arc, then I'm not even going to bring up a character. Like, do I really need to include somebody for this scene? Or is this something that I can just sort of skip over narratively and say, we're there now? There's a lot of movies that skip over stuff too, where it's just like, I was reading a manga the other day of Deadpool, and they started a fight scene, and then they cut to somebody else, and they cut back, and the fight scene was over, and they made some joke about like, hey, I beat those guys while you were gone, right? Typical Deadpool thing. And I thought that was really cool and a good example of like, do we need to do this or do we not? And they didn't want to waste pages on a fight scene when they had other narration to get to, so they just skipped it.
I think it's like where you want to put your energy. I know that there's a book for DMs. I think it's called like The Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, or the Lazy Dungeon Master was the first one. The Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master is the second one. And it's like a thin book, but it gives you like a lot of good tips on what you need to do to prep for your session. And this can be, transcribed into writing or transferred over into writing, because it really emphasizes don't put too much effort on the stuff that doesn't matter, right? So for example, still with that through line of thinking of an NPC, but the metaphor we're going to use is for travel here. So in your first D&D campaign, when you're level 2 or 3, travel is dangerous, right? You're a weak character. You haven't done this a lot. There are dangers. You have to make sure you're keeping eyes out. You're probably either on horses or on wagons or something. If we're talking, a little bit more fantasy or even sci-fi, your first travel is, you have to find the funds to go and do it, and you're watching over your shoulder for this. You don't have your own ship, maybe. You got to watch for pirates, or bandits or whatever the case is. But you do that 2 or 3 times, and then your characters get to a level where it's like, okay, you as a DM, you don't need to make travel hard every single time, because it's going to be a lot more effort on the DM. It's going to eventually start bringing players out of like, oh, I don't want to do this travel. It's so much extra work, even though we're rolling initiative and we're fighting. There's still times and places for that, but I think that metaphor of like, okay, travel is hard at the beginning. You don't have to do it every single time your characters travel. For an NPC, take that like kind of thought process of, maybe a couple of them I need to put this hard work in, but like you're saying, long term, how much work do I really need to put into it? Do I just need to put some work in the front end and that's it? Or do I need to constantly make this character a reoccurring character? Then of course you're going to put a little bit more work and depth into them. But I just thought that was an interesting relationship between like travel and NPC and how much work you want to put towards them. Because some of them, like you said, your tier Z, your tier G, E, whatever, like the bottom tier list, like you're not going to put too much effort into them. And even then, like I said, some of those are just throwaway characters, and then they might move up the ranks, they might move down the ranks, depending on people's interest in them.
Yeah, I think that's a good functional example. I think, and that is a good summary of the question is like, what is their long-term purpose? And like you're saying, do you need to put effort into them? So make sure that's something that you address right at the beginning so that you don't get stuck wasting your precious creative time. And also, building up, if you have your superhero character, I mean, it doesn't make sense to build this ridiculously long backstory for somebody you're going to see for 10 seconds. Whereas if you have your BBEG, of course, you're going to be putting all kinds of time. You're going to make sure that they bump into your main characters a lot before the main battle. They're going to be aiming towards diffusing tension if we're talking about D&D, because everybody just wants to fight right away.
Right.
So they're going to be like in situations where you can de-escalate quickly. You're making sure that they serve the purpose. And that includes like how they test your protagonist. And so I think that's when vibe starts coming in. And we start talking about like, what's your character going to be like, and what's it going to be like in the context of the story. So up until this point, in my opinion, you're talking about what powers does BBEG have, things like that, like what stat blocks do certain characters have, but you're not talking about character building yet. And I think that's the main switch for me, is like, it used to be character building right from the start, and I would add powers right at the end. And that's just me wasting a lot of time up front on a character that may not ever need those, because in 2 hits, they might be dead.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think this is the part of the creation process where it's important to start adding story. So for me, one of the biggest questions is, how do they test your protagonist? And that is because that's cross-functional to D&D. That's cross-functional to like any style of writing. How do they test your player characters or your protagonists? Because it's all about interacting with moral elements in your story. So say your main character is like a paladin or something, somebody that is like super aware of whether good and evil is happening, super aware of, what side of the line they fall on. That's like the lawful good character.
Right.
Every interaction they have should test them in little ways. of that philosophy, whatever their main philosophy is. It should test them a little bit and say, okay, well, here's the train car problem. Are you going to run over one person or 3 people? Because those are your options.
Right. Yeah.
And that should be the character interactions of like, well, I can do this deal with you if you do something for me. And this is the only mode of, say, transportation they have. Then suddenly it's like, okay, well, this seems shady. Am I going to travel at all? Does that completely end this possibility for me? Or am I going to deal with this guy a little bit? Like just starting with sort of innocuous and sort of edging them over, because that's where people find their most interest in stories, is watching these big questions about life play out between characters. It's sort of like an interesting mental test that you don't have any skin in the game for. And I think that's why it draws people in so much. But like, even if it comes down to something as easy as like, this person likes things clean, this person does not, and watching them cohabitate, is going to be a sign of conflict or a place of conflict. It's really easy to build conflict from those sort of smaller moral arguments, because people don't give on those things, especially people who are like really aligned to something like we can all relate to the example of politics in the workplace. Is that something anybody does? Not if they can help it, right?
Right.
And so
it always gets real awkward when people bring it up.
Yeah. So if you have some politically aligned character that always keeps it to themselves, then you have a character, your first NPC they interact with is going to be somebody that pokes at that. Right. And it's going to be, everyone in the story is going to be making comments about that. Right. Because it's drawing them into that bigger conflict within themselves, or that strongest feeling inside themselves that makes them act a certain way. Like anti-heroes are a great example of this, because they do terrible things, like Deadpool, since I'm talking about him. He does all these terrible things, but his overwhelming emotion or his overwhelming drive in life is to help the people he cares about, which is what makes him a hero or an anti-hero, and not just a villain.
Yeah. I think, especially talking about NPCs, like questioning your main character. I've been reading through Aragon again in that whole series. I'm on the second book, and it's really interesting to see where he's been tested over and over and over again. And in the first book, you don't realize that he's being tested by the limited amount of knowledge that his mentor is giving him. And then in the second book, he's like, well, why didn't this person tell me this? Why didn't this person teach me this? Why didn't this person teach me that? It's like, well, we didn't know where you had to have been tested so much, so we knew where your loyalties lied. Because if you would have been swayed due to this other person, then all this knowledge we gave you would have been used against us. And then he's like, oh, well, I guess I see it now, but he was still kind of frustrated at that. But I thought it was really interesting to see that the main NPC, the main kind of mentor of your main character in Aragon, is hiding information constantly from him. And that's just him testing Aragon the entire time. And then you get to the second book, and then they start testing him mentally. They start testing him physically. They start testing the morality of why you're doing the things you're doing. Like, you're about to start a war. This is going to be the cost of the war. Like, what is your reasoning for this? How can you justify people dying and this? And they really go into like the morality of it. And he has to back up his stuff. And it's like, these NPCs aren't antagonists per se, but they're constantly pushing your main character. And I think there's a time and a place where he can be in a safe place and be tested by every single person. Or there's situations where your main character is literally being tested, in combat or in an actual moral dilemma that's outside of, the theory and the morality of it in your writing or in your D&D story or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's like example of a longer term conflict, right? This is a great example of testing their everything. Their very being is being tested. And that's why it's such a great story. And that's why it's lasted so well. And then when you get down to your like tier E characters, then when he bumps into people, it's like, okay, well, they have a, like their clothing that they're wearing shows that they work for the opposition, things like that make it a very quick response. You know who he's dealing with because you see what they're wearing. You hear who they're talking about, as like Murtaugh or something. No spoilers, but talking about talking about him. So there's a lot of ways once you get that overarching conflict down, then you can add in NPCs really quickly and align them on which side of the conflict that your character is fighting. And so that's why it makes it a really cool element to creating NPCs. It's just like a quick shorthand that says, okay, who do I need? What side of the aisle do I need them on? And here we go. Quick splash and done. And so once you have created that vibe in your world of what the conflict is, what the testing is going to be, then you can start adding in your character elements and like what kind of person this is. Let's say you have like a town guard or something. Everybody has something they picture of a town guard, especially if we're talking like a fantasy setting, just like typical guy in like cheap knight armor, and maybe like one weapon, and he's just patrolling. That's what most people picture. Okay, so what if it's the guy that always likes his shirt off? Like there's always that guy in sports or whatever. Like, so what if we have that guy is a town guard, just kind of a gross dude, doesn't work out a lot. He's just standing up on the wall, eating his snack, and good hot day, shirtless, right? With the hygiene of the time. He's real greasy. He's out there, right?
Yeah, of course.
And so like, we've established his function, and now we're adding narrative, or not narrative, but these vibe elements that suddenly shade in a character from that initial, just like he's not wearing a shirt. We can then start picturing who this guy is. And that's just off of one element. And that's why working backwards, I think, is so effective. And there's another, we've talked about making characters a lot on the podcast, and because it's so interesting and it's so fun, but there's one thing that you'll hear a lot in writing classes, which is the moment before, that I think is another really cool element, or shorthand to making interesting characters. And so, or at least interesting character interactions. So the moment before, if you haven't heard it before, is talking about like, what was this character doing before you walked up to them?
Oh, I see.
Right. So like with the receptionist example, it'd be like, okay, she was real friendly with the person ahead of your main character in line. And then your main character comes up and then she's just like deadpan and sassy to him, whatever. And that's the moment before. Like, that's what you're walking into, and that gives you a lot more context to this character. So like, I don't know, town guard, I can't think of anything off the top of my head other than like, he just came from like a town beheading or something. You know what I mean? Like, he's got some blood on him, whatever. Unless you had a thought too.
Yeah, it really depends on like the narrative element and what's going on and what's the vibe of the town or whatever. But you think of like the town guards, like what they were, what changed my opinion on like what town guards was like military presence was honestly Attack on Titan. You look at the first episode, the town guards, the city guards, they're getting drunk, they're having fun, they're chilling, like it's super relaxed because the Titans haven't broken into the city at this point in the story yet. So they're just chilling. And the vibe it got was like kind of like this, not that we drink at work, but this FedEx vibe. Post work, you go out and you grab drinks and then you hang out and do this. But like, it gave me this vibe of when I like a warehouse job. Like, these are guys who they go in, they do the crap that nobody wants to do, and then they still have to defend the city, you know? So I always think like, I try and relate to a warehouse job and how they're going to act there. Because a lot of warehouse jobs, what do they have those jogs. They have kind of that vibe that you were talking about, where, you know, there's the guy with the shirt off, or you just see different walks of life. So you can really pick and choose people, and really implement them into your town guard. So that's what I like to do now with certain settings, is think of warehouse guys and then move them to the town guard, so they have that kind of characteristics, and then you can start mending the moment before based off of this character, and that helps me really create NPCs, um, especially NPCs that don't really have a a big narrative focus. But let's say your players capture someone, they need to give them information. How are you going to role play this character, or what's this character going to be if they're in a situation where they're going to start talking and they're going to start giving information, or what are their mannerisms going to be like? I really try and pull from someone and then use that character as my town guard or whatever, and I give them the same mannerisms of, you know, always like walking around and like scratching their chest, or like you said, taking their shirt off, or, you know, kind of like how their body movement is. I always relate the town guards to someone, right? I always relate these kind of less important NPCs. Sometimes I'll use important NPCs based off of people too. But if I'm just trying to pull from someone quick, I think of my warehouse jobs, and I think, how can I pull them in, and then you can really create that moment before, so that they already have these mannerisms, they already have kind of an attitude. You can already kind of figure out their life based on how close you were as a person to the real life person you're pulling this information from. Just use their life. No one's gonna know, right? Like, the people around you, or the people you're telling the story for, don't know all your friends or don't know all your coworkers. So you can pull their life straight into your story, respectfully. And you know, you've created a more flushed out NPC just by saying, oh, this person's gonna, you know, be like Sean or whatever, and then you can start pulling ideas, mannerisms from it. It helps me out so much whenever I need to flush out a character now, very quickly, like under pressure at the table.
I think, like for me, just to wrap out the moment before, I think, like, if you had a town guard eating a cantaloupe, say, and your character is talking to them, and then somebody walks up and says, "Hey, that's mine," and he just takes a bite out of it. He's like, "You really want to do this right now? Get out of here." You know, It's just like little things like that, where it could be just about anything, but they're interacting with the world around you or around your main character, and it cements the idea that they have a place in the world, and that it's not just them interacting with your character. They'll be here before, they'll be here after your character, which makes for a really rich world. But let's get into what has been inspiring us this week.
All right. This week, I have been inspired by, like I said earlier, I'm starting to read Aragon again, or I'm listening to Aragon, and I'm trying to be a little bit more intentional with taking the story elements from Aragon, and that whole series, because I think it's got a really good fantasy setting to it. I like the way that they describe, I'm a huge dragon fan. If the people in my Dungeons and Dragons group know, I love dragons because dragons have been in and out through my campaign. But I really enjoy their description of them, the history of them, and the history of elves and men and dwarves, and kind of that whole fantasy element of it. And it's really been inspiring for me for like a new world, because it talks about the history of so much stuff, and like, how does that history begin and where does it begin? So in that short story or novel or campaign setting that I'm creating, I'm taking a lot of elements from Aragon. I'm taking elements from, there's a big focus on the village where Aragon is from, and that has really helped me flesh out, like, what is a low magic fantasy village going to look like? What is it going to feel like? What are the politics between, you know, this farmer and the butcher and this person, and how important is it to have land if you want to marry someone else, or have some type of property, or some type of job? So it's been really interesting to see it, and see the history, see how they started creating kind of this movement of people trying to face the big bad, It's been really fun to listen to and remember why I enjoyed reading these books so much. My wife is starting to read through Aragon, and so it's been interesting to talk to her and really decompress stuff from what she's reading and what she thinks. And I'm just had to been like, oh, crazy, but she's been spot on some stuff. So I was like, that's cool. That's really cool. It was a really good story, and I'm taking a lot of story beats. Obviously, I told Molly and I told you, I was like, hey, if you're listening to Aragon and that whole series, the names, the locations, I stole or repurposed the names, but as far as like what the character is, it's not the same. The city, it's not the same. I made those my own, but I just took names because they sounded really good, like good fantasy names. And sure enough, they are.
For your D&D campaign, right?
Yeah, for my D&D campaign, yeah. There was a lot of stuff in there that I didn't even realize. I had forgotten because I created this so long ago and started world building that world so long ago. Even the continent, I call it Allegatia instead of like the whole world, but I call it continent Allegatia. And then there are just so many cities that I used the names for. So all that to say, it's been inspiring me, re-inspiring me to get back into world building, to really just listen to a good story in its act two and seeing how act one paid off into act two and how act two makes act one so much better once you start understanding the reason behind this and behind that. Really, really been fun to re-listen to the Aragon series.
Nice.
That's what's been inspiring me. What's been inspiring you recently?
Well, I got to get back into those Aragon books, it sounds like.
Yeah, really good. I literally, the only gripe I have is in the first book, Aragon passes out like 7 or 8 times. But aside from that, everything else is just so great. It's so phenomenal. The world building's great. The villains are great. The foreshadowing's amazing. It's a really fleshed out book. And to think that this dude did it when he was like younger than us now, like he was a kid writing this stuff. It is absolutely mind boggling.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. I just read he put out a sci-fi book not too long ago, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, and Christopher Paolini, but just as, I mean, it's a huge book and super entertaining to read, and he's got good characters, and I've really enjoyed his writing.
Once I finish through Aragon in the series, I'm gonna pick that one up next.
Nice. But as far as me, like, I've got 2 things, and one is the mocha pot for making coffee. It's
nice.
It makes espresso, but it's something you put on your stovetop, and it's just super good. I mean, I've never made coffee that way, and I've been making it that way a lot recently because it gives that, like, I don't know, espresso has a certain edge to it that like pour over or French press doesn't. And so anyway, I've been really enjoying that. Just trying out a new coffee process is always fun for me because I spend a lot of time making coffee. And then what I really like to do on Spotify is find like artists that are sort of up and coming and making new music, but aren't that big. Because I don't know, the ones you stumble through a lot of music. I listen to like half of a lot of songs, and then I'll find somebody that's like, okay, this is their first song they put on here. This is their new one. It's like, it's greatly improved. Okay. So I'll follow them and I'll wait till they put something else out. And then there's a couple of people I've been following for a few years now. One called Nick D and the other called Connor Price. And I didn't know they knew each other, but they put out a CD together. And so I've been jamming to that. That's been pretty good. It's probably the best either one of them has done, in my opinion. And so I've just been vibing to that and making coffee, and that's made for a good week. So it's rejuvenating me. I'm not sure it has any artistic applications other than I'm just enjoying it as a fan. So, and that's necessary too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely necessary just a healthy life, and creativity is to like have like something just different to help you like get invested in something. It's just another aspect of life that then you can pour into your story and like, oh, this person is really, keen about trying new ways to do this. And it's just so mundane, but that just can bring, talking about NPCs, like that can bring something. You can have your one NPC that's just, hey, this is my passion personally as a person. And this NPC fucking loves coffee. And you can create all the process and you can make it into that fantasy setting. Like there are the groundbreaking, on the floor level of coffee, and they're bringing coffee, and like that's the town's thing is, oh, this dude fucking loves coffee, and we're all hyped as shit because of this cocoa leaf. You know what I'm saying? Like, so
trying
like
all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And so like you can really create something crazy with one passion, and you can create, because every NPCs, villages, towns, like you want to create something that's memorable in your story, and not every city is going to have it. And then you just drop, boom, everyone's wired. Like this city's like, they're constantly up. They have like, they're the ones that like invented like magical lights, right? Because they're wired at all times of the day and all times of the night, and they start drinking coffee super early and coffee super late, right? Because most fantasy villages, like once the sun sets, like that's it, it's nighttime, everyone's around the campfire or telling stories or this, but not this city. This city's just fucking wired.
They stay
so
up.
that inspired me. That for sure inspired me.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
But let's continue with NPCs.
Yeah.
So we can wrap this out for folks. I got, let's see. I should have read this before I said that. I'm sorry.
You're good.
For the second half here, let's go over some NPCs that we've created, and break down the process. So like, I'll start. But so I had this character in a pirate-based campaign that I was just trying to introduce the level of poverty in a city. So he was like, I called him One Eye because I couldn't think of a good name. And I was like, it's piratey, cool. And he had one eye and one leg. And so he had like the wooden leg. And that was his whole thing, like a little goblin character. I was like, okay, this is somebody you're going to feel bad for. And this is your introduction to the world. And I was not expecting to have them more than that intro walk into town, drop them off, and meander away. Okay. But it turned into this character that is someone that my player characters really like mentoring and trying to find like ways to make them more productive and more better off, more affluent. Right. And so I then had to build a personality around him. And so it sort of started off as diminutive, like very like, I'll defer to whatever you want kind of character. And then like as people have been giving him jobs and like a better place to live and stuff, he's becoming more confident. In the story, he has a girlfriend now, and it's like things are going really good for him. And so he's starting to vibe a little bit and grow his hair out, and he's like got his own ship now. And he's gone from like, a cart, somebody that comes down with the cart to the beach to take people up to the village. He's gone from that to this like pretty wealthy, really confident person. And none of that was expected. And I built it around the idea that my characters want to mentor this person. So I need to build in, it's like, what is his function? And it's basically to absorb all of the life advice from my player characters and to allow my player characters. So a lot of the interactions he has, it's like, or the problems he has, or his quests or whatever, are based around whatever my player characters have been doing that they're struggling with. So when characters are role playing and they're talking to each other, then the conversation usually revolves around one or two like moral dilemmas. And one of those moral dilemmas, the one that is more emotionally impactful and is going to be more of a slow burn, I give to one of my other characters called Hornblast. He's very deadpan, and so like it allows my player characters to be the emotion in that environment. And then the other moral dilemma I give to Bellamy, which is his new name, allowed him to rename himself as part of getting out of poverty. He's not going to be known as One Eye anymore. And it was like, there's been a lot of sort of beautiful moments around helping other people, because that's my player characters. They love helping people, but they also love pirating. Right.
Right.
And so I give him these moments of like, these softer moments. So as an example, yes, he got a new name when he was no longer an indentured servant, kind of like Dobby, right? But he had that moment of being free. I know Dobby had a name, but don't at me. But he had this moment of being freed. And part of that moment was getting a new name. And then he had this moment of he really cares for his like pet donkey that he used to like pull the carts, right? So this is like his only friend in the world when we met him. So like that was another emotional beat where everybody was like, oh, like, this dude needs friends, and sort of rallied around him. And then it was like y'all got to a new village, and it was like he met this girl, and I didn't realize that those characters kind of meshed. And then it was like everybody kind of jumped on that and was like, oh, like it seems like they're flirting, which is always funny as a DM because you're just talking to yourself. But it's like, I was like, yeah, they kind of are. Like I wasn't expecting that either. So, and then it was like, okay, he's going to ask my player characters for advice. Like why, like I really like this girl. What can I do? Like kind of like a little brother kind of character that's like, help me do this. And from that, I'm then making him into like, this is a character that's never been confident in his life, and now he has his own ship. Like, what does that look like? Is he going to take revenge for all the bad things that have happened to him? Is he going to be the soldier for justice or something? What does him being a pirate captain look like? And that's kind of where his character is right now. But the function literally was just like, let me have an NPC character so I can talk to my player character on their way into the village. And then that totally changed because she was like adopted him basically. Yeah. And then I built, because of that adoptive relationship, I built his entire persona to fill that role of, and again, this is D&D, so it's a little bit different than writing because you have other people interacting with you. But yeah, I saw the interaction they had with him, and I just made his whole personality based around like, I look up to you guys, help me be you, basically. And these sort of like his inclinations is to get really, really attached to anything in his sphere, and anything that makes him feel safe. And that's like another personality trait. And he also just is starting to get a little bit malicious because he sees the player characters being violent when they're pirating, right? And so he's adopting that into his persona as he's finding himself and learning who he wants to be in the world. So it's very much like a little brother character where it's like it's a little bit ill-defined, and he's going to try out what older brother's trying to do. So that's One Eye, aka Bellamy, and that's a pretty big, I would say. I mean, one of the top 10 probably NPCs I had in my campaign, and it all came from function.
Yeah. I think as a DM, a lot of our NPCs do come from function and then get moved into like either how close they're going to be to the main characters or not, or if they're going to be adopted or whatever. And I think that's where my, unless you had anything else to say about your NPC. Yeah, I think that's where mine comes from, is straight function. It came from when you guys were traveling in our D&D campaign. underneath the mountains, and you were trying to go back to your old hometown of Orthiad that it was had been invaded, and you haven't been to in a long time, but you were traveling back there. I think there was a story reason for it. I can't remember what it was at the time or right now, but
we got intercepted by orcs, and I said, "Take me to your leader," because we were surrounded by them, and there were too many for us to fight. Mm-hmm. And I was just throwing something out there, like, maybe there's a way to negotiate this. And then from that, we ended up in this city.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so, so that's where you get into the city before Orthiad, and then stuff happens. Essentially, at some point, you guys find favor by protecting this. That's back when Michael was also drinking a lot and DMing, and a lot of crazy stuff happened. But anyways, once y'all left one of the cities on the way to Orthiad, y'all were given a guide, and this is where I try to find inspiration from other areas and how to create characters or different aspects of lore. So the name Flack got taken from Borderlands 3. That was a character that I played, because in Borderlands you get to play, I think, one of 4 different characters. Sometimes I think through DLCs you might be able to play a different one, but I think you start off with 4. Every Borderlands game starts off with 4 that you can play. And then you can just you spend so much time. Like, I played a lot of Borderlands, so I spent a lot of time as Flack, and I thought Flack was cool because he had a little pet dude that would help him out, would help revive him, would help attack, gave him more abilities. And throughout the game, you start hearing little bits of lore about Flack. So Flack is this hunter, and he hunts with his little companion, and he's more of like a guide, a hunter, a ranger. Whenever I kind of started to think about what class would this guy be, it became ranger. And so that's not technically the class that Flack is, but that was kind of the vibe I was going for. Is he's going to be the guide. He's the guy that knows where stuff is at in the mountains. He's the hunter. He's the one who understands, okay, we're not going to take this path. We're going to go down this path. This path, it's caused a lot of, whatever run-ins. People go down that path and very rarely come back. So we're going to take this other route. And then as far as his character design, I wanted him to be, he's a hobgoblin. So little bit of a different creature type in D&D, but I wanted him to almost struggle with common. So he always has this kind of whenever he speaks, I have to then he starts talking into his words that he needs to say. But whenever I'm talking as Flack, I really have to open up everything and make it seem like he's really thinking intentionally about the words that he's saying. Wanted him as a guide, and from there he also became a little bit of the person who, if you don't know the history, he would know, because he's been around. He's a character who's probably in his 40s or 50s, but has traveled a lot around the continent because of his past, and his past just gives him a lot of knowledge. He's a very studied person, a learned person. And then whenever you guys wanted to leave, there was an exchange that happened. My players say they bought him. That is not what happened. It was
it's totally what happened.
His boss was like, "This guy is very valuable, and I need, if he's gonna leave you guys, if he's gonna leave and travel with you guys, it's his freedom to do so, but give me something in return." And then y'all paid and gave him gold, and so then y'all say y'all bought him, but that's not necessarily it
100% what happened.
But anyways,
best purchase we ever made. I mean,
but then he's really turned into this character of being kind of that, what each one of your characters needs. I think that's what you kind of said with Bellamy, but for Flack, it's he related to Adani, as far as not being the warrior in the group, but wanted to be that, wanted to prove that. And he made a point to become a friend to her, because he could tell like she felt alienated, so he's like trying to unify the group. He's also a warrior, so he relates to you and your character as a dwarven barbarian. He relates to you because he's also been a captain and he demands respect. And whenever he calls for help, help comes. And whenever he tells his men to do something, they don't question it because he's developed this respect. And then for Astrid's character, or for Grace's character, he helps her, gives her advice. He's there. So like he wants to kind of be this kind of well-rounded person that is along for the ride. And it really helped because of the function that he needed to be as a guide, as a mentor, as the historian. I think that's part of why he's been sticking around and made an impact, because he is a very personable person. He likes hanging out with you guys. He wants to be with you guys. Whereas other NPCs I've created, they have their own agenda. This guy's kind of free floating. He's living life. And so he's just vibing with the crew and he's trying to make sure everyone stays unified. And I think he's probably one of my favorite NPCs I've created. I took a lot of inspiration, one from the Borderlands game and two from the Mandalorians. Before like the show came out, the books of the Mandalorians have like a very warrior culture. They have their own language. I have the Mandalorian tattoo here. So like if it shows anything, like I really enjoy that culture. It's a very family culture. They have tenets and stuff that they are supposed to abide by. They have certain rituals that they do every morning. Flack, every now and then I'll remind you guys that Flack does this every morning, as he says like a little, not a prayer so much, but it's like a mantra or some type of phrase. And it's just he gets up and says the names of all the people that was close to him who have fallen and who have died. So he's got a list of people who are in the Manda, or however you want to say it, which is a Mandalorian thing, a Mandalorian culture. Like the Manda is like the spirit of being a Mandalorian. And whenever you die, you become one with the Mandalorian kind of stuff, and being Darmanda would be a way separated from that. And so he has to live his life to be a part of the Manda. So that's being the family guy, also being the warrior. So he kind of encompasses all these ideas, and it just came from being the function of the guide first and foremost. I think that's easily my favorite NPC. And that's a little bit of background about him and kind of how I came to that, because like I said, with the coffee thing, right? You could have your whole town around this coffee thing. This whole race of the hobgoblins are like Mandalorians. They are very much a warrior culture. They love battle. Dying in battle is like an honor to them. And dying disgracefully would be entering into like the Darmanda and not being a part of the Manda anymore. So and I was very much like, all my interest is going into him. So you're about to say something.
I got one question I wanted to ask about how many sessions did you play before you had his, let's say, like I was talking about earlier, how I kind of reversed my thought process in making characters. How many sessions did you play with him in the game before he had like a well-rounded character sheet? Like you could type up a one page of this is who Flack is. It's just ballpark.
It probably like 2 or 3 sessions, honestly, because I knew he was gonna have to be an ally when it came to battle. So I did need to kind of create a character sheet pretty quickly. And when I did that, and how I like to do NPCs and characters, if I'm gonna play a character, is I'll make my character sheet on D&D or on D&D Beyond, and then I'll start looking at all the stuff that you get as an ability, either at, level 1, 2, 3, and I start making it part of his backstory. And so that's kind of what I did, is I made him, I think, like level 7, because I was 1 level above you guys, or 1 or 2 levels above you guys at the time. And kind of fleshed out like, okay, he has these abilities. So what does that mean? Does it mean like he has this strategy? And I wanted him to just be a badass, right? Because every now and then your crew needs to be another badass. And in your story, that doesn't mean that they're going to be the main character or another main character, but you need to see another badass. There's rivalry that can come from that. There's companionship and camaraderie that can come from that. And so that's really what I was trying to create with him. So whenever he started becoming y'all's guide, I very quickly was like, okay, this is the kind of culture that we need to create real quick. And I was like, oh, this is it. Like, it was just a moment of inspiration. I'm like, oh, he's going to be this. He's going to do that. He's going to have command the respect of this. I think y'all got ambushed at one point while y'all were in the city of the goblins. And at that point, like had already, I think, taken y'all to Orthiad and had come back. And at that point, he respected you guys enough as warriors that he was like, nah, this isn't going to fly here. And then he like brought his whole force around. It's like, we're going to take these guys in as our own because these guys know what's up. They have like a code of conduct that was respectable, a code of honor. And that really determined his relationship with you guys and his badassery at that point. Nice. Some of it was improv as far as like, I think 20 soldiers got like brought around y'all's room as protection. That was kind of improv. It was just a spur of the moment. He was like, hey, we're bringing people here. We're going to protect them. We're going to make sure everything's good.
Well, I think that it's a good point. It's worth mentioning that, I mean, you played 2, maybe 3 sessions when all you had was his function, a loose description, and a name, right? So like just based off a loose description, I mean, that was probably, back then we were playing long sessions too. So that was probably like 20 hours at least of gameplay time, and just based off of a loose description. Yeah. And so I just want to drive that point home as we round out the episode to say that if you start with a good structure, it's going to be very easy to build in the rest. But if you go the opposite direction of making a character that is not attached to any structure, it's going to be really hard to then add them in. So I hope that's your takeaway today on the Creative Thinker podcast. Shout out to creative thinkers all across the globe. And thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have another wonderful week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.